Two little girls were dragged out of a grocery store for trying to take a carton of milk for their baby brother. While the crowd pulled out their phones and called them thieves, a quiet billionaire stepped forward. What happened next would ignite a viral scandal, a courtroom battle, and change three children's lives forever. Night settled over the underside of the 7th Street Bridge in Pasadena like a cold, heavy blanket. The roar of passing cars echoed above, shaking loose bits of dust from the cracked concrete pillars. Beneath one of those pillars sat Ilara Quinn, a thin 9-year-old girl with tangled brown hair and tired gray eyes far older than her years. In her arms lay her baby brother Noah, only 10 months old. His small fingers clutched the collar of her worn sweater, while his weak cries drifted into the night air. The sound was no longer loud. It was the exhausted cry of a baby who had been hungry for too long. Beside Ilara sat her younger sister Lumi, just 6 years old. Lumi hugged her knees to her chest, trying to stay warm beneath a torn jacket that once belonged to their mother. "Is he still crying?" Lumi asked quietly. Ilara nodded, rocking the baby gently. "He hasn't had milk since yesterday." Noah whimpered again, his tiny body trembling. Ilara pressed her cheek to his forehead and whispered softly, "Shh. It's okay, Noah. I'm here." But she knew it wasn't okay. The plastic baby bottle beside her was completely empty. Not a single drop remained. She had shaken it earlier, hoping maybe a little milk might appear somehow, but it had only rattled hollowly in her hand. Lumi leaned closer to the baby and rubbed his back with small, careful circles. "Maybe the store will give us milk," she whispered hopefully. Ilara lifted her eyes. Across the street, glowing under bright lights, stood Pasadena Market. Through the glass windows, she could see shelves filled with food rows of breadfruit and cold cartons of milk, stacked neatly inside shining refrigerators. For a long moment, Ilara simply stared. Then Noah cried again, and something inside her finally broke. The wind under the bridge grew colder as the night deepened. Somewhere above them, a truck thundered across the highway, making the concrete tremble like distant thunder. Lumi wrapped her thin arms tighter around herself, shivering. Ilara gently shifted Noah in her arms, trying to warm him with her body heat. His cries had weakened into soft whimpers that sounded more frightening than loud sobs. "Maybe Mom will wake up soon," Lumi said quietly. Ilara shook her head. Their mother Seraphine had passed out hours earlier in a broken shopping cart shelter on the other side of the bridge. When she fell asleep like that, she rarely woke until morning. And Noah could not wait that long. Another small cry escaped the baby's lips. Ilara's chest tightened painfully. She looked again toward the bright grocery store across the street. Through the glass windows, she could see customers pushing carts under warm yellow lights. Somewhere inside that building were dozens of milk cartons, enough to feed Noah for weeks. Lumi followed her gaze. "You're thinking about the milk," she said softly. Ilara didn't answer right away. Her fingers tightened around the empty bottle beside her. The plastic felt cold and weightless in her hand. Finally, she whispered almost to herself, "He just needs one bottle." Lumi swallowed nervously. "Are we stealing?" The word hung in the air between them. Ilara hated that word. She had promised herself she would never steal anything. But Noah whimpered again, his tiny body shaking with hunger. Ilara slowly stood up. "We're not stealing," she said quietly. "We're just taking milk for Noah." Lumi hesitated, fear flickering across her small face. But she trusted her sister more than anyone else in the world. So she stood too. Ilara lifted Noah carefully, and the two girls stepped out from the shadows beneath the bridge. Together they began walking toward the glowing lights of the grocery store. Warm air rushed over the girls as the automatic doors of Pasadena Market slid open with a quiet, mechanical sigh. The sudden brightness made Lumi squint for a moment as they stepped inside. The store smelled of fresh bread and detergent. Fluorescent lights hummed softly above rows of neatly stacked shelves. People pushed carts filled with groceries, chatting casually, completely unaware of the two small girls who had just entered. Ilara tightened her grip on Noah as they walked slowly down the aisle. Her shoes made almost no sound against the polished floor. Lumi stayed close beside her, glancing nervously at every employee they passed. But no one stopped them. To most shoppers, the girls were invisible, just two more children wandering through the store. Finally, they reached the dairy section. Rows of refrigerators stretched along the wall, their glass doors glowing with bright white light. Inside were cartons of milk stacked in perfect rows: whole milk, almond milk, chocolate milk, organic milk. So much milk. Ilara's throat tightened. She opened one of the glass doors slowly. Cold air spilled out around her fingers. Her hand reached for a carton. But then she stopped. "What if they catch us?" Lumi whispered. Ilara hesitated. She lifted the milk carton halfway off the shelf, then slowly placed it back again. Her heart pounded loudly in her chest. "We should ask someone," Lumi suggested. Ilara looked around, but the nearest cashier was busy helping another customer, and the long line at the register stretched halfway down the store. Another small cry escaped Noah's lips. Ilara's hands trembled. She reached out again and picked up the milk carton. This time she didn't put it back. But before she could close the refrigerator door, a hand suddenly clamped around her wrist. Hard. A sharp voice exploded behind her. "Thief!" The hand gripping Ilara's wrist tightened like iron. She gasped in pain as the milk carton slipped from her fingers and thudded softly onto the floor. "Thief!" The shout cut through Pasadena Market like a knife. Customers turned instantly. The woman holding Ilara's arm was Lydia Cross, the store cashier. Her bright red nails dug into the girl's skin as she yanked her away from the refrigerator. "I knew you were trouble the moment you walked in," Lydia snapped. Ilara struggled to keep Noah from slipping in her arms. "Please," she whispered. "My baby brother, save it," Lydia barked. She dragged Ilara toward the entrance. Lumi hurried after them, her small feet almost slipping on the polished floor. "Let go of her," Lumi cried, but Lydia ignored her. The automatic doors slid open, and Lydia pulled the girls outside into the cold night air. Within seconds, a small crowd began gathering. Some customers stepped outside. Others simply stood near the glass windows watching. Phones came out, recording. Ilara's face burned with shame. "Please," she whispered again. "He hasn't eaten since yesterday." Noah whimpered weakly in her arms. Lydia crossed her arms. "Thieves raise thieves," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. A man nearby muttered, "It's just milk." But no one stepped forward. No one helped. Ilara lowered her head, clutching Noah tightly as tears blurred her vision. Then Lumi grabbed her sister's hand. "We were just trying to help Noah," the little girl said bravely. The crowd murmured, but before anyone could say more, the grocery store doors slid open again, and someone stepped out. The man who stepped through the doors moved calmly, as if the chaos outside didn't surprise him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark wool coat over a crisp white shirt. A faint streak of silver ran through his dark hair near the temples, and his steady gray eyes took in the entire scene in a single glance. This was Adrian Vale, one of the most private billionaires in California. Most people didn't recognize him immediately, but a few in the crowd did. Adrian had only come to Pasadena Market to buy groceries for the community fridge program he quietly funded downtown. But now he stopped. His gaze moved from Lydia Cross gripping the girl's wrist, to the baby crying weakly in Ilara's arms, to Lumi standing beside her sister like a tiny bodyguard. For a moment, Adrian said nothing. Then he stepped forward. "Let her go." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried authority that made several people instinctively fall silent. Lydia turned toward him with irritation. "And who are you supposed to be?" Adrian didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket, and pulled out a sleek black credit card. Then he looked directly at the second cashier standing just inside the door. "Run my card," Adrian said calmly. The cashier blinked. For what Adrian's eyes shifted toward the dairy aisle inside the store. For every carton of milk in this place. The crowd went completely quiet. Even Lydia hesitated. Adrian stepped closer, his gaze now steady and sharp. "And one more thing," he said quietly. "Don't ever humiliate a child again." The tension in the air shifted instantly. Lydia slowly released Alara's wrist. The girl staggered slightly, but managed to keep her balance while holding Noah. The baby's crying had softened to weak whimpers, his small face pressed against Alara's shoulder. Inside the store, the second cashier hurried to the register, nervously scanning carton after carton of milk. Beep, beep, beep. The sound echoed through the entrance. Customers began whispering among themselves. Did he just buy all the milk? Is that Adrian Vale from Vale Robotics? But Adrian ignored the crowd. He crouched down so he was eye level with Alara. Up close, he could see how thin she was. Dirt streaked her cheeks, and exhaustion weighed heavily in her gray eyes. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Alara," she whispered. Adrian nodded toward the baby. "And this little guy, my brother," she said. "Noah." Beside them, Lumi stepped closer, protectively. "I'm Lumi," she added quickly. Adrian smiled faintly. Then he picked up one of the milk cartons from the bag the cashier had brought outside. "You can feed him now," Adrian said softly. Alara stared at the carton as if it were something precious beyond belief. Her hands trembled as she took it. "Thank you," she whispered. Then she hesitated. Her voice dropped almost to a whisper. "When I grow up, I'll pay you back." For the first time that night, Adrian smiled fully. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "Just grow up safe." But behind the crowd, someone continued filming with their phone. And that video would soon change everything. That night, while Pasadena slowly fell asleep beneath the soft glow of streetlights, the video began spreading across the internet. At first, it was just a few uploads on social media. A shaky clip, 2 dirty little girls, a crying baby, a wealthy man stepping in dramatically. But the clip had been edited. The beginning, the moment when Lydia dragged Alara out of the store, was gone. The hesitation in front of the milk shelf was gone. What remained looked very different. The video now showed only a short sequence, 2 girls taking milk. Then a billionaire stepping in like a hero. Within hours, the internet began doing what it always did, judging. Comment sections exploded. Another staged charity stunt. Rich people love pretending to help. Why was he filming already fake hero? By midnight, the clip had reached hundreds of thousands of views. A popular gossip account posted it with the caption, "Tech billionaire Adrian Vale caught staging fake charity moment with child actors." The post went viral almost instantly. Across the city, phones buzzed with notifications. Inside a quiet penthouse apartment overlooking downtown Los Angeles, Adrian Vale stood beside the large glass windows watching the city lights flicker below. His phone screen glowed in his hand. More comments poured in every second. Fake, manipulation, PR stunt. Adrian didn't react. He simply read the posts silently. Behind him, the television news switched to the story. Is billionaire Adrian Vale exploiting children for publicity? The anchor's voice echoed through the room. Adrian slowly turned the TV off. He placed his phone on the table. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he quietly picked up his coat again. Because while the internet argued about what had happened, 3 children were still sleeping under a bridge, and the baby was still hungry. Rain began falling just after midnight. At first, it was light, tiny droplets tapping softly against the pavement. But within minutes, the sky opened completely. Cold rain poured over Pasadena. Under the 7th Street Bridge, Alara tried to shield Noah with her thin sweater. Lumi crouched beside her holding a torn cardboard box above the baby's head like a tiny roof. But it didn't help. The wind pushed the rain sideways. Noah began crying again, his small body trembling with cold. Ilara pressed him close. "It's okay," she whispered, but she knew it wasn't. Headlights suddenly appeared through the rain. A black car slowed near the curb. The driver's door opened. Adrian Vale stepped out, rain soaking his coat instantly. He approached slowly so he wouldn't frighten them. "Ilara," he said gently. The girl looked up in surprise. "You came back." Adrian crouched beside them. The baby's cheeks were flushed. His breathing sounded weak. "He has a fever," Adrian said quietly. Ilara's eyes filled with fear. "He was shaking earlier." Adrian stood immediately. "Come with me." Lumi hesitated. Where? To somewhere warm. Within minutes, they were inside the car. Warm air filled the small space. Lumi pressed her hands against the heater vent with amazement. "I forgot what warm feels like," she whispered. The car drove through rain-soaked streets until it stopped outside a small roadside motel near the freeway. Inside the room, soft yellow light replaced the cold darkness of the bridge. Ilara carefully laid Noah on the bed. The baby sighed softly as warmth surrounded him. Lumi touched the blanket carefully. "It's soft," she whispered. Ilara sat beside Noah, gently rocking him. He's never slept somewhere warm before. Adrian stood quietly by the window, watching them. For the first time since meeting them, he allowed himself a small breath of relief. But outside, the rain kept falling. And somewhere online, the storm around him was growing even bigger. The rain had stopped by morning. Sunlight crept through the motel curtains, filling the small room with a pale golden glow. Adrian Vale woke slowly in the chair near the door. For a moment, he simply listened. The room was quiet. Too quiet. He sat up. The bed across the room was empty. The blankets were still warm, but Ilara, Lumi, and Noah were gone. Adrian stood instantly. Ilara, no answer. He checked the bathroom, empty. The door to the hallway was slightly open. They had left before sunrise. His eyes fell on the small table beside the bed. A folded piece of paper rested there. Adrian picked it up. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, clearly written in a hurry. He read it slowly. "Kind people always leave eventually. I won't let my children be hurt again." Below the message was a name. Seraphine. Adrian stared at the paper for a long moment. So their mother had come during the night and taken them away. He looked toward the empty bed again. The small indentation where Noah had slept was still visible on the blanket. Adrian clenched the note in his hand. Memories surfaced suddenly. A different night. A different door closing. A younger version of himself standing outside a house after his parents' funeral, holding a small suitcase while a relative said the words he would never forget. "You can't stay here anymore." He blinked slowly, forcing the memory away. Then he looked at the door again. "No," he murmured quietly. "Not this time." Adrian pulled out his phone. He dialed a number he rarely used anymore. The call connected after 2 rings. A deep voice answered. "Sanderson." Adrian spoke calmly. "Miles, I need your help." There was a short pause. What kind of help? Adrian looked at the note in his hand again. "I need to find 3 kids." Another pause. Then the voice on the phone said, "Send me everything you know." Adrian walked toward the door. Because somewhere in the city, 3 children were walking back into danger. The morning traffic of Los Angeles had already begun to fill the streets when Adrian Vale stepped out of the motel. The crumpled note from Seraphine was still in his hand. He looked at it one more time before folding it carefully and placing it inside his coat pocket. Then his phone buzzed. Miles Sanderson was calling back. Miles had once been a detective with the LAPD before leaving the force to run a small private investigation firm. If anyone in the city knew how to find someone who didn't want to be found, it was him. Adrian answered immediately. "You got the information?" Miles asked. "I sent everything," Adrian replied. "Descriptions, location of the bridge, the motel." There was a pause as Miles scanned the files. 3 kids, Miles muttered. 1 baby, mother with a history of addiction. Adrian leaned against his car. They left at dawn. Miles exhaled slowly. "Okay. That means they're probably still close. People in that situation rarely travel far without money." Adrian waited. Miles continued. "I'll start with the usual spots: shelters, soup kitchens, public parks." Another pause. Then Miles added something quietly. "You care about these kids." Adrian looked toward the highway where the city stretched endlessly in every direction. "Yes." Miles chuckled softly. "Well then, let's find them." 2 hours later, Adrian's phone buzzed again. A text message. Cited, MacArthur Park, near the lake. Adrian didn't hesitate. He started the engine and pulled into traffic. Across the city, the sky darkened again as clouds rolled over downtown Los Angeles. Somewhere in that crowded city, 3 small children were trying to survive another day. MacArthur Park was almost empty that afternoon. The gray sky hung low over the water, and a cold wind rustled through the tall palm trees that lined the paths. Puddles from the morning rain reflected the dim light, like broken mirrors scattered across the ground. Adrian parked near the edge of the park and stepped out. Miles had sent him a location pin, near the lake stairs. Adrian walked slowly along the path, scanning every bench and corner. Then he heard it. A soft voice. A lullaby. It was faint, almost lost in the wind. Adrian followed the sound, and then he saw them. Ilara sat on a wooden bench, gently rocking Noah in her arms. The baby's head rested against her shoulder as she hummed quietly. Beside her, Lumi leaned against the bench, her eyes half closed from exhaustion. Ilara's voice drifted softly across the lake. "Sleep now, little one. Sleep and don't cry." Adrian stopped several steps away. For a moment, he simply listened. The lullaby was fragile, but there was something strong in it too, something determined. Finally, he stepped forward slowly. "Ilara." The girl's head lifted instantly. Her eyes widened. "You found us." Adrian nodded. "I told you I would." Lumi sat up quickly. "How did you know where we were?" Adrian smiled slightly. Good people helped. He removed his coat and gently draped it over Ilara and the baby. Noah stirred, but didn't wake. "He's still warm," Adrian said quietly. Ilara nodded. "He had a fever earlier." Adrian crouched beside the bench. "You shouldn't be out here." Ilara looked toward the path behind them. "Our mom said we can't trust anyone." Adrian didn't argue. He simply sat down on the bench beside them. For a moment, none of them spoke. The lake rippled softly in the wind. Then Lumi suddenly whispered something. "Someone's coming." Adrian turned his head. Footsteps echoed along the path, and the voice that followed made Ilara's entire body freeze. "Well, look what we have here." The man who stepped onto the path looked like a shadow pulled from the darkest part of the city. Tall, unshaven, clothes wrinkled and soaked from old rain. His eyes burned with a wild, restless anger. Vernon Cade, Noah's father. Ilara's stomach dropped instantly. Lumi grabbed her sister's arm. "Don't move," Ilara whispered. Vernon's gaze locked onto the baby first, then slowly moved to Adrian. "Well," he said with a crooked smile. "This is interesting." He stepped closer. Rich man playing hero. Adrian stood calmly. "You should leave." Vernon laughed. "Leave." He pointed toward Noah. "That baby is mine." Ilara tightened her grip on Noah. No. Vernon's smile vanished. He stepped forward suddenly. I said, give him to me, Lumi cried out. No, before Vernon could reach them, Adrian moved. He stepped directly between Vernon and the girls. You're not touching them. The two men now stood only inches apart. Vernon's breath smelled of alcohol. You think money protects you, Vernon sneered. Adrian didn't blink. No, he replied quietly. But it helps me stop people like you. Vernon swung suddenly. Adrian caught his wrist mid-air. The impact echoed through the quiet park. Let go of me, Vernon snarled. Adrian's grip tightened. You're done. At that exact moment, sirens echoed across the park. Red and blue lights flashed through the trees. 2 police cars skidded to a stop near the path. Officers rushed forward. Hands where we can see them, Vernon froze. But his eyes burned with fury as officers forced him to the ground and snapped handcuffs around his wrists. As they lifted him up, he twisted his head toward Ilara. His voice came out like a promise. This isn't over. Ilara shivered, but Adrian stood firmly beside her, and for the first time since that night in the grocery store, the girls were not alone. The flashing red and blue lights painted the trees of MacArthur Park in harsh, pulsing colors, while the cold wind rippled across the lake. Police officers forced Vernon Cade forward as he struggled against the metal grip of the handcuffs, his boots scraping against the wet pavement, while he twisted his neck to glare back at Ilara. His eyes were wild with rage, the kind of fury that came from years of bitterness and loss of control. You think this ends here? He spat, his voice hoarse but venomous. They're mine. I'll get them back. The officers pushed him toward the patrol car, ignoring his protests, as one of them opened the rear door. The metal slammed shut behind him with a heavy thud that seemed to echo across the entire park. For a moment, the world fell quiet again, except for the distant sound of traffic and the restless wind over the water. Ilara stood frozen on the bench path, Noah still wrapped in Adrian's coat. Lumi clung tightly to her sister's arm as if afraid the moment the police cars disappeared, Vernon might return from the shadows. Adrian remained beside them, calm but alert, watching until the patrol vehicles finally drove away and the flashing lights faded into the distance. Only then did he crouch down slightly to Ilara's level. Are you all right? He asked gently. Ilara nodded, though her hands were trembling. She tried to hide it by adjusting the coat around Noah, who had fallen asleep again after the noise. Lumi whispered, Is he really gone? Adrian glanced toward the empty road where the patrol cars had disappeared and answered carefully. For tonight, yes. But even as the tension faded from the park, the storm surrounding Adrian was only beginning to grow. Across the city, the edited video from the grocery store continued spreading like wildfire through social media. Comment sections exploded with speculation, accusations, and conspiracy theories. Some posts claimed Adrian had staged the entire scene for publicity. Others accused him of exploiting homeless children to boost his image. News channels replayed the edited clip again and again, while panels of commentators debated his motives. Inside one small apartment across town, Lydia Cross sat in front of her laptop watching the chaos unfold with thin satisfaction. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard before typing another anonymous comment into the growing storm of outrage. Fake charity stunt, she wrote under the video. I saw the whole thing. He planned it. Within seconds, the comment began gathering hundreds of likes. Back at the park, Adrian's phone buzzed repeatedly in his pocket. Messages from reporters, alerts from news networks, calls from his legal team. He ignored them all for now. His attention remained on the 2 small girls standing beside the bench and the baby sleeping peacefully against Ilara's shoulder. Let's get somewhere warm again, he said quietly. This time, somewhere safer. Ilara looked uncertain, remembering the note her mother had left at the motel. But she also remembered how Noah had slept in warmth for the first time in days. She glanced down at her baby brother, and then back up at Adrian. "Okay," she whispered finally. Lumi squeezed her sister's hand, and together the three children followed Adrian along the path toward the parking lot. Above them, the clouds thickened again, darkening the sky, as if another storm was preparing to roll across the city. By the time Adrian drove the children across downtown Los Angeles, the controversy had already exploded far beyond social media. News stations interrupted their afternoon broadcasts to replay the viral clip. The footage showed two ragged girls holding a milk carton, while a wealthy man dramatically stepped forward with a credit card, the scene framed perfectly to suggest manipulation. Headlines scrolled across the bottom of television screens: "Billionaire Adrian Vale accused of staging charity stunt." Commentators debated whether the act was genuine kindness or a calculated public relations strategy. The internet moved fast, and within hours the story had become a national trending topic. In a quiet office tower several miles away, Adrian's lawyer Rachel Park watched the coverage with growing frustration while fielding phone calls from reporters demanding statements. Meanwhile, Adrian parked outside a small community shelter on the edge of the city. The building was modest, but clean, a place that provided temporary refuge for families with nowhere else to go. As the children stepped out of the car, Lumi stared up at the building with cautious curiosity, while Alara adjusted the blanket around Noah. The baby was still sleeping, his breathing soft and steady, now that the fever had begun to fade. Adrian led them inside, where warm lights replaced the gray gloom of the street. A volunteer at the front desk greeted them kindly, offering blankets and hot tea without asking too many questions. Lumi accepted the cup with both hands, warming her fingers while whispering, "This place smells like soup." Alara allowed herself the smallest hint of relief as she sat down beside her sister. But Adrian's phone finally rang again, vibrating insistently in his coat pocket. He stepped aside to answer. Rachel's voice came through, immediately calm but urgent. "Adrian, we have a serious problem. The edited video is everywhere. Someone is pushing the narrative that you staged the scene with those kids." Adrian glanced back toward the waiting room, where Alara and Lumi sat quietly beside the sleeping baby. "It wasn't staged," he said simply. Rachel sighed. "I know that. But the public doesn't. We need the original footage from the store cameras if we want to shut this down." Adrian paused for a moment, thinking. "Then find it," he replied. "And whoever edited the clip." Rachel agreed and promised to begin immediately. Across town, Lydia Cross continued feeding the scandal from behind her computer screen, sending anonymous messages to bloggers and gossip accounts, claiming she had witnessed the entire event. Each new post added fuel to the spreading outrage. Within hours, reporters began calling the grocery store, asking questions about the incident. The manager, confused by the sudden attention, started reviewing the store's security recordings. What he would eventually discover there would change everything. But for now, the story remained twisted, the truth buried beneath layers of speculation and accusation. Back at the shelter, Adrian returned to the waiting room. Alara looked up anxiously. "Are we in trouble?" she asked quietly. Adrian shook his head and sat down beside them. "No," he said. "But some people are telling the wrong story." Lumi frowned slightly, trying to understand. Adrian offered a reassuring smile. "Don't worry," he added gently. "The truth has a way of finding its way back." Outside the shelter windows, the evening sky darkened again, and the first rumble of distant thunder rolled over the city like a warning of the storm that was still building. The next afternoon, the auditorium of the East Side Community Center filled quickly with reporters, camera crews, and curious onlookers. Microphones lined the long table at the front of the room, while bright studio lights bathed the stage in a harsh white glow. The controversy surrounding Adrian Vale had become the biggest local story of the week, and every major outlet wanted a statement. Rachel Park had arranged the press conference with careful precision, knowing the only way to stop the rumor storm was to confront it directly with evidence. Adrian entered quietly with Alara beside him, Lumi holding Noah in her arms while a shelter volunteer stayed close to help. The moment cameras recognized him, flashes burst across the room like small explosions of light. Reporters immediately began shouting questions before the conference even started. "Mr. Vale, did you stage the milk incident for publicity?" one called out. "Are those children actors?" another demanded. Rachel raised her hand for silence while Adrian guided the girls to a seat beside him. Ilara looked overwhelmed by the sea of cameras pointed toward her, and Lumi shifted nervously as she tried to keep Noah comfortable. Adrian leaned down slightly and spoke softly to them. "Just tell the truth if anyone asks," he said. "That's all we need." His calm voice steadied them. Just as the moderator prepared to begin, a sudden voice rose sharply from the middle of the audience. "You're all being fooled." Heads turned as Lydia Cross stood up, her expression tight with anger. She pushed forward through the rows of reporters until she was close enough for the cameras to catch her clearly. "I was there," she announced loudly. "Those girls were stealing milk, and he set up the whole thing to look like a hero." Murmurs rippled through the room as journalists quickly pointed their microphones toward her. Adrian remained silent, watching calmly, while Lydia continued speaking. "They planned it," she insisted. "I saw the way he walked in right on cue." Rachel exchanged a glance with the technician near the stage and gave a subtle nod. The giant screen behind the podium flickered to life. At first it showed the same viral clip everyone had already seen. Lydia smirked confidently, believing it confirmed her accusation. But then the video suddenly rewound. The image shifted to the beginning of the store's full security recording. Now the footage clearly showed Ilara hesitating in front of the milk shelf, picking up the carton and putting it back again before Lydia grabbed her arm. The audio captured the girl's quiet plea. "My baby brother cried all night." The room fell completely silent as the scene played out exactly as it had happened. Gasps spread through the audience. Cameras swung toward Lydia, whose face drained of color. When the clip ended, Adrian finally stepped forward to the microphone. His voice was steady but firm. "I didn't come here for praise," he said. "I came because no child should be shamed for trying to feed their family." Behind him, the screen froze on the moment where Lydia dragged Ilara outside while the baby cried. The truth now stood undeniable before every camera in the room. Reporters began speaking at once, their tone completely different now. Some asked Lydia to respond. Others demanded clarification from the store management. But Lydia no longer had anything to say. She stood frozen as the storm she had started collapsed around her. And in that moment, the story began turning in a very different direction. The silence inside the auditorium lasted only a few seconds, but it felt much longer. Reporters who had arrived expecting to expose a scandal suddenly realized they were witnessing the opposite, the unraveling of a lie. The giant screen still showed the paused frame of the security footage, Ilara clutching the milk carton, while Lydia Cross gripped her wrist, the baby crying weakly in her arms. One journalist slowly lowered his microphone and muttered, "This isn't what we were told." Another reporter leaned toward Lydia with a camera inches from her face. "Miss Cross, would you like to explain why the video circulating online was edited?" Lydia's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The confidence she had displayed moments earlier drained away, replaced by visible panic. The room filled with the rapid clicking of camera shutters as the media documented the moment her accusation collapsed. Adrian Vale remained composed at the podium, while Rachel Park stepped forward to clarify the evidence. She explained that the full footage had been obtained from the store's internal security system and verified by the time-stamp and payment records from the register. Each detail matched exactly with Adrian's purchase of the milk cartons. "This footage," Rachel said firmly, "shows that the original video shared online was deliberately cut to remove key moments." Murmurs of anger spread among the reporters. Many had already posted stories accusing Adrian of manipulating the situation, and now they realized they had been misled. One investigative journalist stood up and spoke loudly so the room could hear. Who distributed the edited clip, he demanded. Was it someone connected to the store? Lydia stepped backward, as if the floor beneath her had suddenly become unstable. I just shared what I saw, she stammered weakly. But the evidence behind Adrian told a very different story. At the back of the auditorium, several reporters were already updating their headlines. Phones buzzed across the room as editors demanded immediate corrections. The narrative that had spread across the internet began shifting in real time. A news producer whispered into her headset, "Switch the headline." The video was manipulated. Another journalist raised her microphone toward Adrian again. "Mr. Vale," she asked, her tone now respectful. "What do you say to people who accused you of staging the event?" Adrian paused briefly before answering. "I understand why people reacted the way they did," he said calmly. "The video they saw wasn't the truth. But what matters most isn't clearing my name. What matters is making sure these children are safe." As he spoke, the camera lights reflected off the screen behind him, where the frozen frame still showed the crying baby. It was a powerful image, one that no edited clip could erase. Meanwhile, outside the building, the corrected story began spreading across the same social media platforms that had fueled the original accusations. Viewers who watched the full security footage quickly realized how much had been hidden. Comments flooded in with new reactions. "That poor girl never even stole the milk. The cashier dragged her outside. The billionaire actually helped them." The tide of public opinion turned rapidly, and within an hour the viral narrative had completely reversed. But inside the auditorium, another development quietly unfolded. As reporters continued questioning Lydia Cross, a man in a dark suit approached Rachel Park and whispered something into her ear. Rachel nodded, once her expression sharpening slightly. She stepped back toward Adrian and said quietly, "The police want to speak with her." Adrian glanced briefly toward Lydia, who now stood surrounded by journalists and cameras. For the first time since the conference began, she looked genuinely frightened. 2 days later, the atmosphere inside Los Angeles County Courthouse felt very different from the chaotic energy of the press conference. The courtroom was quiet, almost solemn, with the polished wooden benches filled by reporters, social workers, and several curious members of the public who had followed the story. At the front of the room sat Judge Carolyn Brooks, her calm gaze scanning the documents placed before her on the bench. To her left stood the assistant district attorney, preparing the charges related to the confrontation in MacArthur Park, where Vernon Cade had threatened the children. To her right sat Rachel Park, representing Adrian Vale, while several rows behind them, Lydia Cross waited stiffly beside her legal counsel, her earlier arrogance replaced by anxious silence. Ilara sat quietly in the front row with Lumi beside her, both girls dressed in clean clothes provided by the shelter. Noah rested in Lumi's arms, chewing on a small toy, while occasionally looking around the unfamiliar room with wide eyes. Adrian sat beside them, offering quiet reassurance whenever the girls glanced toward him nervously. The hearing began with the prosecutor presenting the police report from MacArthur Park, describing how Vernon Cade had attempted to seize the baby before officers intervened. Photographs and witness statements were entered into the record. When the prosecutor finished, the judge turned her attention toward Vernon himself, who sat at the defendant's table with his hands clasped tightly. "Mr. Cade," Judge Brooks said evenly, "this court has reviewed the evidence of your behavior. Threatening the children and their guardian is a serious offense." Vernon stared down at the table without responding. The hearing then shifted to Lydia Cross and the false accusations that had ignited the media storm. Rachel Park presented the verified security footage from the grocery store once more, along with records showing the edited clip had been distributed anonymously from a device traced back to Lydia's home network. The courtroom murmured softly as the judge reviewed the evidence. Lydia's lawyer attempted to argue that she had merely shared a misunderstanding, but the judge's expression made it clear the explanation carried little weight. Spreading manipulated evidence that publicly shames a child is not a misunderstanding, Judge Brooks stated firmly. Lydia lowered her gaze, unable to meet the eyes of anyone in the courtroom. Finally, the judge addressed the question that mattered most: the immediate safety and custody of the children. A representative from Child Protective Services explained that their mother, Seraphine Quinn, had agreed to enter a supervised treatment program to address her addiction issues. Until she completed the initial phase of that program, the court needed a temporary guardian to ensure the children had a stable environment. The judge looked directly at Adrian. "Mr. Vale," she said, "are you prepared to accept this responsibility under full CPS supervision?" Adrian rose from his seat. "Yes, Your Honor," he replied simply. The judge nodded thoughtfully before making a note in the file. The courtroom remained still as Judge Brooks turned her attention toward the children. While the legal arguments and evidence had filled most of the hearing, the judge understood that the emotional truth of the situation often came from the people most affected. "Ilara Quinn," she said gently, "would you be willing to come forward for a moment?" Ilara hesitated, her small fingers tightening around the sleeve of her sweater. Lumi gave her an encouraging nod, and Adrian placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder before she slowly walked to the small witness stand designed for younger speakers. She climbed onto the chair carefully, her feet barely touching the floor as she looked up at the judge. Judge Brooks softened her voice slightly. "You don't have to be afraid," she told the girl. "I just want to understand what you want." Ilara glanced briefly back toward Lumi and Noah before answering. Her voice was quiet but clear. "I want my brother to be safe." The judge nodded patiently. "Do you feel safe right now?" Ilara looked across the room at Adrian standing beside Rachel Park. For a moment she seemed to search for the right words. "Yes," she said slowly. "When he's around, Noah sleeps better." The statement was simple, but it carried a weight that silenced the room. Even the reporters lowered their pens for a moment. The judge leaned back slightly, considering the girl's words, alongside the evidence already presented. Finally, she spoke again. "This court recognizes that stability is critical for these children." She turned to the attorneys and the CPS representative. "Until their mother completes the first stage of her treatment program, the court appoints Mr. Adrian Vale as temporary guardian under full supervision of Child Protective Services." The gavel struck softly, echoing across the courtroom. Lumi broke into a small smile as Ilara climbed down from the witness chair and returned to her seat. Adrian crouched slightly so he could meet the girl's eyes. "You did great," he whispered. Ilara nodded shyly, though relief was visible in her expression. Across the room, Vernon Cade scowled but said nothing, knowing the restraining order now prevented him from approaching the children. Lydia Cross sat rigidly beside her lawyer as the judge confirmed the investigation into the manipulated video would continue separately. With the formalities complete, the courtroom slowly began to empty. Reporters hurried out to file their stories, while CPS representatives arranged the next steps with Adrian and the girls. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. Ilara stepped onto the courthouse steps and looked up at the clear sky. For the first time since the night of the grocery store incident, the future ahead of them felt just a little less uncertain. The courthouse steps felt warmer than anywhere Ilara had stood in a long time. Sunlight filtered through the clouds, casting soft golden light across the wide stone plaza. Reporters had mostly disappeared, now chasing the next story somewhere else in the city. For the first time since the night at the grocery store, the noise and attention had faded away. Ilara stood beside Lumi while Adrian spoke quietly with a CPS worker a few steps away. Noah sat in Lumi's arms, happily chewing on the edge of his toy, as if the courtroom drama had never happened. Lumi looked up at her sister. "Does this mean we don't have to go back under the bridge?" Ilara shook her head slowly. "I don't think so." The words felt strange coming out of her mouth, like something she had dreamed about too many times to believe it could really happen. Adrian walked back toward them, slipping his phone into his coat pocket. "All set," he said gently. Ilara looked up. "Where are we going now?" Adrian smiled slightly. "Home." The word hung in the air for a moment. Home. It had been a long time since that word meant anything real to the Quinn children. Lumi's eyes widened. "You mean your house?" Adrian shook his head. "Our house," he corrected softly. Ilara felt something warm spread slowly through her chest. She looked down at Noah, who had finally fallen asleep again against Lumi's shoulder. For the first time in many months, he was sleeping peacefully. 3 months later, the apartment smelled like chicken noodle soup. The kitchen of Adrian Vale's downtown penthouse was filled with warm afternoon sunlight. Steam drifted slowly from the pot on the stove, while Ilara stood on a small step stool stirring carefully with a wooden spoon. "Slow circles," Adrian reminded her. "I know," she said, with a small grin. Across the kitchen table, Lumi sat in a chair feeding Noah tiny pieces of carrot from a bowl. "You have to eat the orange ones," she told him seriously. "They make you strong." Noah giggled and smeared carrot across the table. The apartment felt alive now. Quiet laughter, soft footsteps, the sound of dishes clinking. A gentle knock came from the door. Adrian opened it. Standing there was Seraphine Quinn, their mother. She looked thinner, but her eyes were clear for the first time in years. Behind her stood a recovery counselor from the treatment program. Seraphine stepped inside slowly. Ilara froze. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ilara ran forward and wrapped her arms around her mother. "You smell like soap," she whispered. Seraphine laughed softly through tears as she hugged her daughter tightly. "I'm home." Across the room, Lumi clapped excitedly. Noah waved his tiny hand, and Adrian quietly turned down the stove so the soup wouldn't boil over. That evening, the apartment felt warmer than it ever had before. Dinner plates rested on the table, still half full of soup, while the soft glow of the kitchen lights filled the room with gentle yellow warmth. Noah had fallen asleep in a blanket nest on the couch. Seraphine sat beside him, watching the baby breathe slowly and peacefully. Across the room, Lumi rummaged through her backpack. "I forgot something," she announced. She pulled out a sheet of paper covered in colorful crayon drawings and carried it carefully to the table. Ilara leaned closer. "What is it?" Lumi placed the drawing in the center. On the page were 5 stick figures standing under a small house with a red roof. 3 children, 1 mother, and 1 tall man beside them. Above the drawing, Lumi had written 2 crooked words in bright blue crayon. "Our family." No one spoke for a moment. Seraphine covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes again. Ilara smiled quietly. Adrian picked up the drawing and studied it. "It's perfect," he said softly. He walked to the wall beside the bookshelf and carefully placed the picture in a frame. When he stepped back, the drawing caught the light from the window. Bright, colorful, simple, but unmistakable. A home. That night, the Quinn children fell asleep without fear for the first time in years, and somewhere deep inside the quiet apartment, a family had finally begun. Did this story move your soul? Share your feelings in the comments and rate it from 1 to 10. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, then tap the bell icon so you never miss a new story. Click the end screen to watch another heartfelt video. See you in the next story.